Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Reilly. I'm the coordinator of Chicago Wilderness. And I hope that this is not the first Chicago Wilderness Cafe that you've been able to attend, but we're really pleased to have you here today and wanted to let you know that we will be recording this event, and the recording will be posted on our website, and it will also be shared with the people who registered for the event today. But we ask that everyone keep themselves on mute during the course of the cafe today. And you can go ahead and put your questions into the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and during the panel discussion, hopefully we'll be able to address the questions that you put into there. And we also have turned on live transcripts. So if you need any assistance with that, please let me know. As I said, we're pleased to have you here today, but we have another Chicago Wilderness Cafe coming up on December 2nd, and it is Leading in a Network. And I'm going to put that in the chat. I hope that you're able to join us for that and future cafes. Also, if you have a topic that you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out to me and we can work together to bring your presentation to life. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Kessel from the Forest Preserves of Cook County and look forward to learning from him today.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day this Friday to be with us here with this Chicago Wilderness Cafe. I'm absolutely honored to be speaking before you this afternoon, and then also very honored to be speaking with the amazing panelists that are joining us for the talk today. So as you know, you're here for Land Acknowledgements, Intention and Action. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide. Okay, so we're going to start off with introductions. And so, Haumakakeapi and Masiapi, Adam Kessel. Hello, my name is Adam Kessel. I am of Lakota, Italian, and German ancestry. I am the program coordinator with the Forest Preserves of Cook County. And that puts me in any part of Cook County. My region is the South region. So if you'd imagine Cook County, 87th Street all the way down to Sauk Trail is my region that I run education and recreation programming with my team. And today I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. And you'll meet the panelists a little bit later in the presentation. But I'm going to start with Shaban Marks. Shaban Marks is the Communication and Marketing Director at Indian Community School in Franklin, Wisconsin. The school celebrates 52 years of Indian-led education, serving 372 K through 8th grade Native American students. Her ancestry includes Ojibwa and Cree nations. She has an active role in her community, serving as a board secretary for the Gerald L. Ignace Indian Health Center and board chair for Spotted Eagle, which is a Native workforce development agency in Milwaukee. Shaban is a water walker and protector. She has stood up for Indigenous rights and sovereignty to protect Native people, Mother Earth, and all living things in creation against mining, pipelines, racism, violence, and social indifference. She is a second-degree Medeowan, a mother, an auntie, and a grandmother. Next, I'd like to introduce Deborah Yepapapan. Deborah Yepapapan is Yamana and Korean, is a mother, wife, daughter, visual artist, and Chicagoan. Her multimedia practice, which combines digital collage and photography, centers on themes about her mixed race identity as she incorporates symbolic imagery influenced by both her cultures and the urban environment where she was raised. Deborah is currently the Native Community Engagement Coordinator for the Native American exhibition at the Field Museum and is a governor-appointed board member of Illinois Humanities. Both through her artwork and her work at the museum, she is committed to changing inaccurate representations of Native people and advocates for the inclusion of Native first voice and perspectives. Along with a small collective of Chicago-based Native artists, Deborah has recently helped to co-found the new Native arts organization Center for Native Futures, which aspires to be the epicenter of Native arts in the Midwest. Deborah currently lives in her hometown Chicago with her husband, artist Chris Papin, and their daughter, Jay. Next, I'm going to introduce, and last but certainly not least, Shante Moore. Shante is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation and African American, and works as the project coordinator for Chicago Public Schools American Indian Education Program. She also has over 15 years of financial industry experience as a licensed financial professional. Shante also has other leadership roles in the Chicago and Native American community by serving as the president of the board of the American Indian Center of Chicago, and sits on the Administrative Oversight Committee for the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative. Shante earned her bachelor's degree in accounting from Roosevelt University and obtained her Master of Business of Administration from Grand Canyon University. So again, that's our amazing panelists that are going to be speaking to you just in a little bit. And as we start off the day this afternoon, please, again, mute your microphones, but there's going to be some video. So I ask that you crank up your audio if you haven't already. And as we move forward, we at the Forest Preserve start all of our programs by reading our land acknowledgement. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. The Forest Preserves of Cook County acknowledges that we are on the lands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, as well as the Miami Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki peoples. As a land management agency, we acknowledge that we have played a role in shaping the histories of local Native Americans by acquiring this land. We also recognize, share, and celebrate their immemorial ties to this land. We commit ourselves to developing deeper partnerships that advocate for the progress, dignity, and humanity of the many diverse Native Americans who still live and practice their heritage and traditions on this land today. So during this talk, we're really going to be looking at land acknowledgements and how they can look different and be presented differently by different organizations. So the next land acknowledgement that I'm going to show you is actually a video of the land acknowledgement for the Indian Community School, which is Shaban's organization. So this would be the point that you want to crank that microphone up. This video is only about 1.5 minutes, so it'll be quick, but it really is a great way to showcase the different ways that you can incorporate your land acknowledgement into your organization and unique ways to share it with the general public and with your community.
Poso Meep, Minugujib, Westaciously, Hanapi. Good morning. It is a good day today.
A good day to acknowledge the prayers of our grandmothers and our grandfathers, to look at and understand different perspectives and the important connections that shape who we have become. We first acknowledge the land and the water that has become home to Indian Community School. We acknowledge all of the caretakers of this land, those who were removed or erased from their traditional homelands here, and those who most recently lived here as a nation, the Bodwe-Watami, Keepers of the Fire, who reside here as part of the Three Fires Confederacy and are known today as the Potawatomi, and those whose creation stories in neighboring lands and who have called this territory home for as far back as can be remembered. The Ho-Chungra, people of the sacred voice, today known as the Ho-Chunk, and the Omatnomoyak, people of the wild rice, known today as the Menominee. The most recent caretakers, the students, teachers, staff, and board, of the Indian Community School. And we acknowledge the faces of the ancestors yet to come.
There are stories all around us. We can reach up, pull one down, and listen. Students filled with excitement and anticipation as their graduation day nears.
Teachers eager to engage students in learning and growing their skills.
Grandfathers and grandmothers whose patience and tenacity have shaped dreams into reality.
Everyone's story is unique. Every path traveled takes different twists and turns. But all these stories intertwine in one journey, the history of Indian Community School.
That was a really unique way to share your land acknowledgement, and it was a great production by the Indian Community School. So today's agenda is going to look like this. We're going to go through, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about land acknowledgements, right? So I'm going to do a really brief review. I think most of the folks that are on this call today have heard of a land acknowledgement. It's not such a new thing anymore. A couple of years ago it was, but we're going to go ahead and go through it and really kind of talk about why it's there, why it's important, and how it can be really significant in supporting your organization to build meaningful relationships and partnerships with the Indigenous communities in the regions that you guys are located. And then we're going to also go through how the land acknowledgement has increased partnership opportunities within the forest preserves and really kind of pushed our organization to think differently about the way that we're partnering with the Native community and the type of land access that's happening as a result of these partnerships. And then finally, we're going to get to the next steps for the forest preserves, and hopefully that will help to inform your organization of maybe you have a land acknowledgement and you're thinking about how to take it to that next level. And then that'll be pretty quick, and then we'll do the panel and we'll hear from all of our panelists about how the land acknowledgement has influenced their work at their respective organizations. So jumping right in, land acknowledgements review. I told you it'd be short. This is the slide here. So number one, land acknowledgements are so very important because it refutes erasure and invisibility, right? So we're moving the conversation from Indigenous people and Native people from the past tense to the present tense and to talking about the vitality and the future of Native communities. And it allows your organization to think deeply about the messaging that you're sharing about Native people to the public, to the communities that you serve, and then how that influences the way that you work with Native people. Number two is that writing a land acknowledgement is a co-creation process. This should be the vehicle that you use to begin building those connections, asking those questions. What organizations, Native serving organizations or tribal governments are within your region. So it's a great way to begin thinking deeply about who's on the land, or who, in some cases, whose ancestral homelands are you on? And then that might even bring your work outside of the state. For the state of Illinois, we have no federally recognized tribal lands. So we're working with Native serving organizations locally, but also looking at tribal governments in states like Oklahoma, where it was a major relocation state for tribes that were here. So these are some of the processes that you're going to start as part of the land acknowledgement writing. And then number three, and for me, I think this is the most important part, is what is the reciprocity of your land acknowledgement statement? What relationships are you building with Indigenous communities and why? So think about what your organization does. because it's a two-way road, right? If you're reaching out to a Native community, a Native serving organization, or a tribal government, you have an ask, right? You're working on this land acknowledgement, and you're hoping for some guidance and some knowledge from community in the writing of that statement. But where's the reciprocity in that? What types of land access are you thinking about? What are the needs of the Native community in your area? And those are the types of questions that need to be built into a land acknowledgement so that you can take it to the next step. Because the biggest issue here is when the land acknowledgement becomes popularized in a way where it just becomes a checkbox and performative. But really a land acknowledgement is the starting point for the partnership and for the work. And I'm going to show you some of that, what that looks like, or what that has looked like over the past 2 years in the forest preserves. So the other piece here is that land acknowledgement statements are not static. They need to be ever changing. For our state, for Illinois, we have no federally recognized tribal lands, but that can change. And it will eventually change, right? So too will your land acknowledgement. In this case, we had an initial land acknowledgement, and we created an opportunity for community members to share and let us know what changes needed to be made. Even though we wrote this land acknowledgement in partnership with the American Indian Center of Chicago, we still need to keep an open dialogue with the Native community so that we can make that land acknowledgement reflective and respectful of the communities that we are not acknowledging in that statement. So in October, we changed it based on the recommendations from a member of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma. Again, Oklahoma is where the tribe's reservation is, but the Miami people, their homelands is here in Cook County in Illinois. So one piece that they brought up to us was that by saying ancestral homelands and a place of trade, if you look, the original statement that we had was the Forest Preserves of Cook County acknowledges that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires. So one, ancestral homelands made it sound as though it was past tense, and that we wanted to change it to a word that includes just the land. Someone's got their mic off, and I'm hearing some great music. If you could, okay, thank you. And then it relegated this land acknowledgement to what felt like a past tense. And that's something that we needed to change and that they brought to our attention. The other piece within this first line was that we said, and a place of trade. And the Miami people, this was their homeland, along with Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. So a place of trade made it sound as though these tribes were just passing through. And again, that wasn't the case. So we needed to change that so we were respectfully acknowledging these tribes. And as a result, we took that out. So from ancestral homelands, we changed it just to the lands of the Council of the Three Fires. And then we included the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki peoples, and we took out a place of trade. And that was a great recommendation. And that's the fluidity of a land acknowledgement, is that once you get it out there, be ready. Once you start working with community, be ready to get feedback and be ready to incorporate those changes and have those conversations. So I have to do my quick spiel about the forest preserves, right? Over 70,000 acres of forest preserves in Cook County. The Forest Preserves as an organization has been managing this land for over 100 years. And I love to show this map because it shows just the scale of the Forest Preserves. Over 11% of the land area in Cook County is Forest Preserves. But I also wanted to show this map here in partnership with these two. So this is the 1804 Scharf map of the major and minor Indian villages of Cook, Dupage, and Will County. This map was created just after the Treaty of St. Louis, which displaced more Native people west of the Mississippi, and right before the Treaty of Chicago. So when you look at this map, you can see clearly that there's a lot of forest preserves that are green in the same spots where there are major and minor villages. So I show this because this is part of our responsibility to do this work and to create opportunities for land access. And the land acknowledgement can be that vehicle to help institutionalize that partnership and that equity around land access. So very quickly, I'm going to go through a couple examples. Our land acknowledgement statement was made official in 2019 at the opening of a new earthworks. I'll show you a picture of that next. At the Serpent Twin Mound. This was a art project that was done in partnership with the American Indian Center of Chicago, Chicago Public Art Group, and a local native artist by the name of Santiago X. And these are the Twin Serpent Mounds. So this was finished in 2019, and the land acknowledgement statement was read at that event opening. And we've been using it in programming and at events ever since. And here's a few other events, and you can really kind of see just the distribution of programming throughout Cook County. The next event that we did this year actually was the American Indian Center's annual powwow. It was at Schiller Woods, so connected to that Twin Serpent Mound and activating that site at Schiller Woods. The American Indian Center hosted its 68th annual Chicago powwow. And this was after a break. It was not at the forest preserves for a number of years. And the American Indian Center came to the forest preserve, said, we want to do it this year. And it was great. So that was the next big partnership for this year. The next one was Kayaking the Des Plaines River. So the American Indian Center is one of the partner organizations that was trained in our Greater Maywood paddling program. And essentially, it's a gear library of kayaks. And community leaders at the center were trained on how to paddle the Des Plaines River. And they've been having opportunities to do paddling events in non-moving water at Thatcher Woods Glen, and then also having opportunities to paddle from the Maywood boat launch up to Schiller, the Schiller boat launch at Irving Park. So again, making that connection to that mound site and continuing to activate Schiller Woods around culturally based community-led programming.
Adam?
Yes.
I have a quick question for you. We've gotten some feedback on your mic, and I know that you were aware of it yesterday, but is there anything that you can do maybe to even speak without the headset? Would that be helpful?
Let me give it a try.
Yeah, and if not, I apologize. We can hear you, no problem.
Okay. But is that helping at all?
Actually, no.
No. Okay.
I apologize.
Sounding any better?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. I will try to increase the bass in my voice when I speak. So moving along, winter solstice ceremony we did in 2020, and this was at Schiller Woods. So Schiller Woods, if you're not familiar with Cook County, is on the north side of Cook County. Schiller Woods is on the south side of Cook County near the community of Riverdale. This was a partnership with American Indian Health and Friends of the Forest Preserves. And it was during COVID, and it was the first traditional ceremony. So it was a traditional winter ceremony that has happened on the forest preserves. And we hope to do it again as a seasonal opportunity. So this was another great way that the land was used for programming and for cultural programming and ceremony. All right, and that moves to our next event, which was at River Trail Nature Center, which is kind of in the center of Cook County, North Center. And And this was a partnership with American Indian Health Services of Chicago. I think the American Indian Center was a part of it. The Trickster Gallery was a part of it. The St. Kateri Center was a part of it. And this was on May 5th, it was National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. To promote awareness, American Indian Health Service and the other organizations that I mentioned, we're sponsoring this event at River Trail, and it tells the story of the obstacles that the Native community has faced historically in seeking justice for women and their families with the Red Dress Project. So there's an event, a small powwow, and these red dresses were hung throughout the woods to represent the murdered and missing Indigenous women, to raise awareness to the community about what was going on. This was another event that was happening during Party for the Preserves, which is an event that happens throughout Cook County on National Public Lands Day. And this was a powwow that was put on by St. Kateri Center at Bunker Hill Forest Preserves and on the north side of Cook County. And another great example of it was a pop-up powwow. So it was a little bit smaller, counting only 3 drums. It wasn't as big as the competition powwow at the beginning of the year, at Schiller Woods. But again, another great way for the community to utilize the forest preserves. This one was a staff training and a work day at Trickster Gallery, and the Trickster Gallery is in Schaumburg. This is a great way to show that the reciprocity that exists within partnerships. So, being mindful that we're not extractive and asking communities for information, but that there's that reciprocity. And in this case, it was a resource management department and our conservation and experiential programming department going out, getting a tour and learning about the Trickster Art Gallery, but then also working in the native garden that surrounds the gallery, doing plantings. All right, so the next steps in relationship building. So we're recognizing the special obligations to Indigenous people and to communities who have historically and who have a historic and ongoing relationship with the forest preserve. So some of the next steps that we're hoping and we're working towards right now is looking at redefining what our stewardship program looks like for Indigenous communities. So looking at an Indigenous community stewardship cooperative. This would allow for stewardship days with ceremony. It would allow for traditional seed harvesting and incorporation of traditional land management in the restoration practices for those sites, and the autonomy to do some of these ceremonies and this work in the forest preserves. So that's one of the next steps. Another one is identifying or creating or working to build a partnership to have a tribal liaison position. That acknowledges that once you create a land acknowledgement, the asks of the organization increase because we're creating safe spaces for Native people to make these requests. And it becomes a full-time job because we want to be responsive. We want our responses to be in a respectful way and in a timely way. So that's another piece that we're working on. And then also increasing our connection with tribal governments.
Adam?
Yes.
Do you want to try moving your mic? Because it might be that it's rubbing up against your collar or close. You got a little bit more muffled. Sorry.
Okay. I'll try that. I actually turned that mic off. I'll try. Well, I'm almost done. It'll be the panel's turn in a moment. So I'm just kind of push through this last slide and then I'll open it up to the panel. So that kind of brings us full circle to our panel. And our panel is going to start off today, and I'm actually going to stop my screen share so that we can get moving. Again, I apologize for my audio. But we're going to start the panel off. The first question for our panel is, let me get to it. we're looking at how has your organization's land acknowledgement statement influenced your work and in community. So again, each panelist, you can introduce yourself one more time, just in case we had anybody coming onto the event late. And then you can go ahead and answer that question for yourself and for your organization. So I'm going to start off by calling out to Deborah to start us off with this.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Adam, so much for inviting me to take part in today's discussion. I'm Deborah Yepapapan. I'm Jemez Pueblo and Korean. I'm the Native Community Engagement Coordinator at the Field Museum. Are we all introducing ourselves first, or as we're answering these questions?
I think you can introduce yourself and go with the question, and then you can call on the next person.
Okay, all right. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in today. I'm just really glad to see just a large group of people, and everyone is interested here in learning about land acknowledgements. And I think the question for me to start was about, and this is something that I always, bring notice to, is that as a Native person, my land acknowledgement is going to be completely different from, the land acknowledgement of an institution or an organization, and particularly the institution that I work at the Field Museum. I'm not sure if I have the ability to share my screen, but what I will do is I will put the link to the Field Museum's land acknowledgement in the chat. And what I'll do now, if you want to pull up that the Field Museum's land acknowledgement, I'll read my personal land acknowledgement, and this is something that I have attached to the signature of my email. And this is also one that I read when I do presentations and whatnot. Although I consider myself a Chicagoan, as a Jemez Pueblo and Korean woman, I acknowledge that I am a guest on this land. This land was home to Potawatomi people who were forcibly removed from here. Ojibwe, Odawa, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Miamia, Sauk, Fox, Meskwaki, and Peoria people also had relationships with this land and each other. My respects and gratitude go out to all the Native ancestors who once lived here, and also to my Native brothers and sisters who continue to live here. So, as a Native person living here, I would hope that if we were in different times and different circumstances, that I would be a welcomed guest by the Native people that do live here, as they would be welcome when they come to my homeland. My ancestral homelands are in Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico. And I hope that today, as other, Native peoples visit New Mexico, that they show the same respect, that they are guests when they visit there as well. And just so, referring to the Field Museum's, land acknowledgement, I think as institutions and organizations, as Adam said, earlier in his presentation, that, a land acknowledgement should be written in collaboration with Native people or in conversation with Native people. Native people should not be asked to write the land acknowledgements for institutions and organizations, because I think part of writing a land acknowledgement is the journey, is the learning, is the engagement and interactions with Native people. And it's the learning, especially, that's the most important. And, I will admit that it's my own personal land acknowledgement has gone through many iterations, and any mistakes that are made are my own, but they come from the continued conversations that I have with other Native people. And to be honest, and maybe this is calling out the Field Museum, my employer, a little bit, I wish that I wish the process was a little different. I wish that we did have more conversations with Native people, to create this land acknowledgement. I think land acknowledgement for organizations and institutions for non-Native people in general is, a great way to even look at your own positioning, to see, to look at your own personal history and how you came to be in the places that you're at. Is that by, immigration? Is that by colonization, settlerism? I think all of that is really important to acknowledge as well. So it's not just acknowledging the land. It's also about acknowledging your own history, your own family's history. But, at the center of all of this, though, it's really about acknowledging Native people and who those people are that, we're not invisible, because if we were, you wouldn't see us here on this screen. I hope you see me on this screen. But by acknowledging Native people, then, I think that would help you to learn how to see us, to see that we are here. So, of course, again, just kind of reiterating that your land acknowledgement as non-Native people is going to be completely different from mine. And I'll go ahead and pass this on to Shantae.
Hey, Deborah, thank you. And thank you, Adam, for inviting me to speak on this panel. Again, my name is Shantae Moore. I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, African American, and I work with Chicago Public Schools and our American Indian Education Program. Also following in the steps of Deborah, she used to work with our program before joining the Field Museum. But as far as our land acknowledgement, so to be very clear, Chicago Public Schools, as the third largest school district in the country, we actually don't have a land acknowledgement, not anything that's formally adopted through the entire school district. And as you can imagine, having over 600 schools, over 300,000 students, our American Indian student population only represents 0.3% of that population. And there is no process to have anything formally adopted. However, within our department at our program level, yes, we have decided probably about 3 or 4 years ago to take on a land acknowledgement, to create one and to adopt it at a program level, which we do use at most of our events when we open our events. And within we work under the Office of Language and Cultural Education in Chicago Public Schools, and they too have supported our land acknowledgement. So as far as how it, really affects the work that we do, our program goals are to serve any kindergarten through 12th grade student, including preschool, and support them academically. So we're not educators. Myself, we're a 3-person team, very small team, whose job is to make, American Indian education known throughout the whole district. But we're not educators. And I think that's the first kind of barrier to overcome. Our job is to support the students, and a big part of that support beyond academics is actually to support them culturally. And we've learned that we've had to go into the schools and speak to administrators and, try to make relationships with executive officers to bring the advocacy work, to let them know that, hey, our Native student population exists and they need to be acknowledged. And a part of that for us was to create a land acknowledgement. Oftentimes, our American Indian students in Chicago Public Schools are probably the only Native American Indian student within that one school. So you can imagine being a Native American Indian child, and this was myself growing up and attending through the Chicago Public School District, where me and my sister were the only Native American Indian students that we knew of at our school throughout our entire time while, going through different schools in the district. So we find it important to have representation for our students, not only, in the history books with teachers, but also so that they know that, again, like Adam talked about earlier, combating that invisibility, combating that erasure, because a lot of our students are not, they are ignored. Their American Indian culture is not represented, or if it's taught in the classrooms, we know that it's taught from a white settler colonialism perspective, and that is often harmful as well. So we just find that even though we are not in the classrooms, we're not the teachers, what we can do is advocate to bring in that cultural awareness to our school district. And that starts with having a land acknowledgement at least readily available on our website, which I could share my screen real quickly to show you our website, where we do have that posted. Our website is t7kids.wordpress.com. And on our homepage in the middle is where we created our land acknowledgement. And I know we'll talk about later in the panel, like how we created it. But I did want to share those details with you all. And our land acknowledgement is very different from the forest preserves. It's very different from the Field Museum. I love Milwaukee, the Indian Community Schools video. That was super awesome. So I'll just stop right there and just pass it over to Shaban Marks.
Bonjour, everyone. I'm sorry, I had to find my button to unmute. Bonjour. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself in our sacred language, Ojibwe Mound, if you could bear with me. Zigwan Nodenans Indigenous Cosmi, Gizi and Dodem, Odawa Zayaganing, Ojibwe Onishinabe Quatenba, Menomini Zayaganing and Dojaba. I gave you my name, which my English name is Siobhan, but my spirit name means the warm breeze of spring. I'm Eagle Clan. I'm a descendant of the Lakota Ray in northern Wisconsin, as well as Cree descent. And my family was originally from Rice Lake in northern Wisconsin. So I have the extreme honor of addressing all of you today and learning from you. And it's just been remarkable. Chimi Gwich, Adam, for this kind invitation today. Our school is a little different than what I heard from Shantae and from Deborah, your experiences. We are very fortunate that this is Indian controlled education, and we own all 178 acres of which our school resides. And it's a beautiful 178 acres. And we sought that out specifically for the type of land where we wanted that for our children. In Chicago, especially our Native youth there, I've heard Dr. Megan Bang, and it was a life-changing moment for me, because I realized how biased I was when I thought about our Native youth in a big city. And when she said that the children were saying, well, how do we connect to the land? Everywhere there's cement and asphalt and buildings and parking lots, and taking those children through alleyways and in the cracks of the pavement up would come our strong plant medicines. And that just really touched my heart and made me realize that we are all on Indian land. It may be covered with different things, surfaces, but this is the land of our ancestors. It is the land of our people and of our future ancestors yet to come. So here at the school, with all of the gifts that we have, when it came time to write our land acknowledgement, we realized that we couldn't address the land without addressing the water, because the water has a spirit. We look after that spirit as the Anishinaabe Kwe, Mede Kwe, and many other, I can know that many other Anishinaabe women or women of other tribal nations, it is traditionally our role to look after, protect, and stand up for that water. And so that was really important. We did ours a little differently. We acknowledged the water right away. And then we use that. Their very first usage is in our 50-year film documentary. And you saw just the beginning of the trailer for that film documentary. We felt so strongly about the statement that we came up with, that we wanted to acknowledge our historic film. So hopefully it will be released, COVID pending, this spring. So in terms of who did we work with and how did we develop it? Again, we're really lucky. We have a board of directors that are all Native. A third of our staff that work here are Native. I myself am, and of our leadership team, 2/3 are Native. So it was a much easier collaborative process, I think, than perhaps some of you have undergone or may undergo as you move forward with this. But it doesn't mean that we didn't have our challenges. We certainly did. And we also reached out to all of our tribal nations and our Native organizations, especially our elders, and we asked for their input and feedback, and in many ways, approval on the words that we were using. It was coming up with those words for those that were removed or erased is like a huge, huge thing. Those are 3-4 words that encompass so much more. We have so many tribal nations. I've heard some of those names in the land acknowledgements I've heard this morning. And we realized as we were trying to list all that we knew of, there's so many that we could never name because that erasure and a removal was so very intense and successful that those people, we couldn't possibly represent them in any other way than to acknowledge that we know that we have ancestors that were here as caretakers of this land. We don't own this land, we don't own our water, we take care of Mother Earth and her lifeblood, the water. So in developing our statement, we really wanted to address that. We wanted to make sure that everyone, our students, our staff, our community felt that this is more than just looking back. We are very much alive, forever flowing and changing race of people, right? And we're very proud of our traditions and our languages. And so it's important to acknowledge the caretakers today, and then those young ones, those babies yet to come, who will become the caretakers of tomorrow. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. I really applaud all of your efforts, Deborah and Shantae, and what you've done, Adam, and what you've accomplished as well. It's beautiful, it's encouraging. The other thing that I guess I can share with you, it's always been our school's way of being, is to invite the community. So when we talk about reciprocity, that's always been a part of our school since the very beginning. And when we say Indian Community School, the community part is in many ways the most important, because we couldn't do what we do successfully without community involvement. We could teach our little ones the language and culture and traditions all day long. And if they go home and their families don't know and don't learn and don't feel connections to Mother Earth and her lifeblood, the water, it's probably not going to be staying with our children. So we really do our best to try and bring the community and families along with us as we go. And that's where the reciprocity comes in. We do a wild rice camp here in the Norman camp, and we invite the community in on a night. We do the same thing for a deer camp and many of our other events. Cultures first. It's like COVID has gotten in the way of that in many ways. But we're finally now just carefully starting to be able to open that up a little bit and safely invite the community back here to our land and our water. And we do as much as we can to share and answer questions, and also encourage those. We get asked a lot, can you help us write the statements? And we always say, you know, we're happy to give you some feedback, but that is a journey. You said that so very well, Shantae, that it is a journey, and it's a journey that you need to go on and then work together in conjunction with the tribal nations there. So miigwech for allowing me to speak. I appreciate it. Adam, I think this goes back to you.
So I wanted to put this out to the group. We had a question that was for Shantae, but I'm going to give it to Shantae, and then we can put it back out to the group. And it was a question about yes, curriculum that I'll read the question for you. To enhance curriculum to be more inclusive of Native American and Native American history from the Native perspective.
Adam, here.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. Is there any other thing you could try, like maybe removing your headset altogether again? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Adam. Oh.
Okay. Try this again. Any better? Yes. Okay. So the question is about a Native or culturally based curriculum. So that one's for Shantae with CPS, but when Shantae is done, if Deborah and Siobhan could talk about any culturally based curriculum also that you have, that you utilize in your organization. So I'm going to go ahead and send this over to Shantae first.
Yeah, I saw that question come in, and thank you for Lauren for asking the question. So curriculum is actually a much larger conversation. Um, we are one of many, many Native organizations within the city of Chicago who support our Native American Indian community and students. And we all have a curriculum challenge because we want, we believe that Indigenous education, learning about American Indians is history that all individuals should know, that we should, that should impact all students. It's not just for our Native students to learn about. We do have we have some current efforts going on in the community, in particular with the Newberry Library and the McNichol Center of Indigenous Research. They have a project that they started called Indigenous Chicago, where we're actually developing curriculum that can be used not only in the Chicago Public School District, but any school or statewide district, or citywide, city school. And we're at the table having those conversations about what curriculum looks like. How do we get it, proposed at a state level? We did have a state representative, LaShawn Ford, who I believe it was earlier this year or the end of last year, he had a campaign to increase what's being taught from a history level through to the Illinois State Board of Education. And we were part of those efforts to broaden that horizon, because he wanted to not increase just about Native education, but, let's learn about Jewish heritage, African-American heritage, Black history, and really increase that learning, again, all history for all students. But no, we don't have any specific curriculum. On our website, we do have resources for teachers. We do have a learning library, but it's still very limited. There are quite a few Native American teachers who are, educators within Chicago Public Schools, and we leverage them for tutoring our students, and they will help us develop some of our cultural programs, some of our academic lessons that we do offer our students. But that's where we're able to directly impact the educational resources that's available. And, we also, another thing that we have done is professional development for teachers as well. So again, I mentioned we operate under the Office of Language and Cultural Education. So that talks about, supporting bilingual students. It also talks about supporting refugee students. And then we also talk about supporting American Indian students. So our teachers get an opportunity to learn from our perspective of how important it is to recognize our American Indian students and how to teach and present culturally appropriate education. So the work is in process. We're nowhere near where we hope to be, but again, we're working with other organizations like the American Indian Center, American Indian Health Services. There's a lot of, again, quite a few Native organizations in the city where we're collaboratively working to tackle this lack of curriculum efforts. So I hope that answers the question there.
Thank you. Deborah and Shaban, do you either have a comment on this?
Are we talking about responsibilities of organizations and institutions once they make their land acknowledgement? I think when I think about the Field Museum and their land acknowledgement, thinking about the, how that might impact my work, I think what happened at the Field Museum was in reverse. I came on, I was hired on, well, actually I volunteered. I was a volunteer for 9 months before I was hired on as a community engagement coordinator, because the Field Museum is renovating the Native American Hall after nearly 70 years of these exhibits not being paid attention to. And so I think, by my being there and my, just by me being a Native person and trying to indigenize the space, I I was actually influenced by Northwestern University's Land Acknowledgement. That was the first time I had seen one, and it just really hit me. And I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. I want to do this too. And so I started doing that, and I started encouraging others at the museum to do that as well. And then, once we had our advisory committee in place of all Native advisors, that's when we started to try to create, a land acknowledgement for the field museum. My own thinking around land acknowledgements and the process in which the field museum took has changed so much in like the last 3 years. Like if I were to go back again, because since then I've also been consulting other organizations and around the city on how to create land acknowledgements. And so if I could go back again and take that same kind of position at the field museum to consult on how they should, I would definitely have them do it differently, because I think, again, going back to, recognizing your own positioning, recognizing really like knowing the history of the land that you're on, where the field museum sits is actually unceded land. That was land that didn't even exist when Native people were removed from this area. That was the lake. The shoreline actually only went up to where Michigan Avenue is right now. And it wasn't until after the fire, when was that, in 1871? That there was so much debris that was left from the fire that they started to fill in and extended the shoreline to create this land that went beyond the original shoreline. And so that is where the field museum and museum campus sits right now. And that was not part of any of the treaties that removed any of the Native people from this area. And so that's why in the early 1900s, the Pokagon Potawatomi and a few other nations came back and tried to sue the city of Chicago for that unceded land. And which was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, but they lost. Of course, they would lose, right? So, there's so much research that has to go into really understanding, the land that you're on, that your institution or organization is on, and so, and it kind of, going back to what you said earlier too about land acknowledgements, that I feel like, they are living documents. You're not going to make a perfect land acknowledgement that first time. And I think you have to realize that, that learning happens as you go. And, you have to be flexible to change that land acknowledgement. I know institutions and organizations, they want those timelines. They want it set in stone. They want it perfect. They want it, as accurate as possible. And with this though, it's so complicated. Land acknowledgements are actually pretty complicated. I'm still learning who once called Chicago land home. It's not just, it's not just clear, it's because our people moved around, we were travelers. We didn't always stay in one place all the time, like we traveled this entire, continent, and even down into South America. We were travelers, we moved. And so it's hard to say definitively that this spot right here was only, and so, and that, again, it comes from research, it comes from listening, it comes from having conversations and engaging with, and having that flexibility to, like, if you don't get it if you don't get it right the first time, it's okay. You can come back and change that again. And, you may go through so many iterations, and which, I have to take this back to my institution and have this conversation with them and do this differently. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Miigwech for that, Deborah. I just really am enjoying hearing you and Shantae speak today. I appreciate your words so much. Again, I feel so really fortunate because we are in a unique situation here at Indian Community School, being an Indian-led education entity, we put culture first. And then we say, how do we fit academics into it? And we continually challenge our teachers and our staff to think that way as well. We really kind of turned it on its ear. When it came time for us to write the Land and Water Acknowledgement, it did, however, give us pause and make us realize that, oh my gosh, we've got to do better. We've got to go deeper and broader in that. And I can tell you that in the last 3 years since we've written our statement, I see students out on our boardwalk doing math problems, or they're walking through the oak savanna and they'll stop and they'll write poetry, or they're sitting out just on Mother Earth on the green grass and doing their reading. And so that's, in terms of connecting with Mother Earth, that's what we've challenged our teachers and staff to do is, and I think it's our Land and Water Acknowledgement really helped us get truly to that position of land-based education, just by sheer means of getting our learning outdoors more. And we have so much there that our children can participate in. Another important piece that we have is called the Our Ways Teaching and Learning Framework. And that was actually developed with feedback from 800 of our tribal people throughout the state of Wisconsin and beyond our borders. It started out as a focus group of 100 and grew into a group of 800. And we asked, what is important for our children when they graduate from 8th grade to know? And from that, we developed strands. And each of those strands has lesson plans that go with them for every single grade from K4 through 8th grade. And our teachers are continually, those changing and evolving, right, as their knowledge and awareness changes, and as things in the world change and we become more aware of things going on in Indian country, or something that perhaps science has just unfolded, which our ancestors have always known, but now we can say, aha, now we can connect this to a science curriculum here. So it is forever changing. But I'm really very proud of our staff because I see it every day. I noticed it last year when we worked on the yearbook with the students. We have the yearbook club here. And as we're going through page after page after page, you can literally see it. Our children are out on Mother Earth as part of their everyday educational experience. And it's just fantastic. It's doable. And if anyone has any questions about the Our Ways Teaching and Learning Framework, I invite you to contact me. Be happy to share with you the materials and resources that we have. Miigwech.
Thank you. So that was some great information on culturally based curriculum that's happening in Wisconsin and here back in Chicago as well. One of the next question that we're going to pose to our panel, and again, I invite everybody that's watching to go ahead and add questions to the chat as we go, has the importance of land acknowledgements changed, in your opinion, whether we're talking about the use in an organization or within Native communities?
Yeah, I think so. Because as I mentioned, the first time I saw land acknowledgement, I thought that was like, yes, that's what we need to do. And so we created one, I created one, then the Field Museum created one. And then, but then I started seeing like other people like kind of, I think what shifted for me was when I started seeing other people, other colleagues of mine, just kind of create their own land acknowledgement without really understanding what they should be about. And then they were copying my words. And then because the first iteration of the Field Museum land acknowledgement was also kind of taken from my own personal one, so it was using my words. And then that went live on a website. I started seeing other organizations and institutions, I guess, referencing the field museums, but in a way, they were actually referencing mine. And so then I would hear my own words in a land acknowledgement in these various other places and public events. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, you're not, like I've done the work in this. I've put some emotional labor into this, and you haven't. You've only stolen, my land acknowledgement, stealing something else yet again. And so, then that really helped me to see just how superficial they were. And it felt like it was just such a trend. Everybody, because one person was doing it, everybody else wanted to do it, but then nobody was backing it up. And people were only asking, they were asking Native people to write them for them. They were asking Native people to come and read land acknowledgements for them as well. And so, with the way that organizations and, like non-Native organizations and non-Native institutions were going about that, it obviously just made it really feel like it was just a trend. And there was no real substance to what they were like. Did they really understand the meaning and why this has to be important? And so I think just within the last, like maybe 3 or 4 years, I've noticed, especially, having conversations with other Native people too, like we've become very critical now of land acknowledgements when we hear them. And, we try to look at who that institution is. And then now we're like, well, but how are they helping Native people? Do they even have Native people that are working there? How are they like, what are they doing to amplify Native voices? They had very limited or no Native awareness. And when you talk to those people, you always had to start from the ground up in Native knowledge. It was always starting at the Native 101. And so, so last year, some colleagues and friends of mine, we hosted a land acknowledgement conversation through the Field Museum on Indigenous Peoples Day. And I'll put that the video link in the chat. But it was, 4 Native women just kind of having a conversation around how we felt about land acknowledgements, and, the problems that we see with them, and, the responsibility that we feel that these, non-Native organizations have to take, when they're making those acknowledgements. And you really have to look at the work, that you're putting in beyond that acknowledgement. And it's really about how are Native people benefiting from that? And what are you doing to help Native people?
I think I could just share next as far as has the importance of land acknowledgements changed over the past few years? I definitely think so. We really first started seeing land acknowledgements come out really as a result of the Standing Rock and the pipeline issues that started back in 2016, where organizations were intentional about how do we acknowledge the land. But I also think it's important to recognize that Indigenous communities have always recognized our land. We've always started cultural events and gatherings and, traditional ceremonies by recognizing the Indigenous inhabitants of that land and in that area. So, while some individuals and cultural and education institutions, in particular in the US, have adopted, that custom, we obviously know that a vast majority also have not. And I think one thing that I'm proud, we talk a lot about invisibility and erasure of Native cultures. We're often thought of something as the past. We don't really think of what's happening to our Native communities in the present. And one thing that I'm appreciative of is that there has been a spotlight on many Native issues, which has really brought land acknowledgements to the forefront with those issues. We've seen missing, murdered, and Indigenous women issues publicly displayed on national news media outlets. We've seen the same thing recently with a lot of the Indian boarding school children who, unfortunately, where we saw these bodies being uncovered, still being uncovered, thousands and thousands of these Native children who didn't return home. These issues are still in the forefront, and I'm appreciative that we're not seeing as much of that invisibility as we have in the past, although these things are, the negative aspects of our communities. I think it's also, and because we've seen a lot of these Native issues at the forefront, more organizations are seeing the need to also recognize and say, well, what can we do to recognize these Indigenous peoples and these original inhabitants of these lands that our institutions reside on? And they will change. You know, like Deborah made a great point. These are fluid documents. It will constantly change. Your perspective might change. I know a lot of folks are in the chat asking, like, how do we start? Where do we start? There's a lot of guides out there that are appropriate to use that can help you identify, you know, the original inhabitants. It can help you identify that history. You know, it's always best to, you know, have the conversations with the elders and the leaders of those communities to get that history as well. And you always want to make sure you compensate them. Don't ask for their time and efforts without something being reciprocated to them. But yeah, I think the importance is constantly changing because, you know, acknowledgement in itself, it's simple. It's very simple. And you know, it's easy to say, oh, we'll create a land acknowledgement and just acknowledge something. But I think it's more of with the right intentions, it's a powerful way of showing respect and also a step toward correcting a lot of the stories and practices that did erase Indigenous people's history and culture. And it really does offer, you know, institutions an opportunity to invite and honor the truth of that history. So, it will change. I think organizations are constantly now seeing it ever more important with knowing that our Native peoples are here. We've always been here, and we're still going to fight for our issues to be at the forefront and acknowledged, at minimum, at least acknowledged.
Oh, I support your comments so much, Shantae and Deborah. I think as a marketing communications professional, I know that one of the things, well, there are many things, and Shantae just hit on it. There's been a tremendous social change that's going on, and I really believe Black Lives Matter really helped Native causes tremendously. We've seen some of the sports mascots teams change over since that. The land acknowledgements have come up during that time. In fact, we were working on our land and water acknowledgement during those times of Black Lives Matter when it was at its pinnacle. So I think the awareness component cannot be overlooked. And yeah, I definitely see we get asked a lot. So it is apparent that there are a lot of organizations out there that want to check off a box and say, okay, this everyone's doing this, so I need to be doing this. It's an uncomfortable conversation. I don't know how to get started. Let me go to someone who's done one. I admire theirs. I'm either going to lift it, copy it, and change just enough of the words, or I'm going to ask for their help. And so again, I just want to re-echo the things that I heard, because it's also what we tell people. It is a journey. And this is part of self-discovery of your organization, of the land that you reside on, of the people, and working with those tribal nations to make sure that it's inclusive of them. So great conversation. Great.
Thank you. We had a great conversation around that. And another question that popped up in the chat was asking the panel, asking you all, how do you differentiate the land acknowledgement? How do you use the land acknowledgement with the younger audience? If you have any examples of that.
Well, I kind of don't understand that question, because I don't think there needs to be, you know, like a kid-friendly version. I mean, I think, you know, if your land acknowledgement includes, like, you know, the history of your organization and maybe some of the faults of your organization and how you're trying to work to make things right. I mean, I don't see how that is, you know, like that wouldn't be educational for young kids. You know, I think, you know, Shantae and Saban, I think, sorry, I think that, you know, like education starts very, very young and very early. And I don't think that we give children enough credit for being the very, very smart and brilliant human beings that they are. If anything, I think children are more understanding of all of this than adults are. They are so wanting to learn. They want to teach their parents. Like, I know of kids that go home and are like, Mom and Dad, I can't believe that, you didn't know this about Native people. I've personally witnessed children before the deinstallation of the old Native American Hall at the Field Museum. I would observe, students walking through the old hall. And, but at the time, my husband, Chris Papan's work was, on display, and the kids were all like, they wanted to stop. They were reading the labels. They wanted to look at the art that, Chris had in there. They wanted to see all the pieces and learn about them. And it was the adults that was pulling them along. The adults were like, no, we don't have time. We need to go. They're all dead. But the kids are much smarter than that. And I think we just need to give children the credit that they so deserve. I think that they would be happy to or maybe involve them in the process of creating a land acknowledgement, have them help do that research. I bet they would be thrilled to do that.
Yeah, I totally echo Deborah's sentiments. When I was growing up and my school was doing an event, as a student, I knew that we had to stand up and we had to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and we had to sing songs to, represent our country, and it was like it was like a common practice to do these things, right? And I think that for youth, land acknowledgements should be a common practice as well. Again, acknowledgement, it's a small gesture, but it's meaningful when we develop authentic relationships and have informed actions behind it. But for youth, it creates, general awareness to Native sovereignty and cultural rights, looking at equitable relationships and reconciliation. And I think it's a common practice that should be spread. And I don't think we have to think of it in a way to like make it, like dumb it down or make a more youth, enhanced available version. When we think of why do we have land acknowledgements in the first place, it's to offer recognition and respect, just like we're expected to know our Pledge of Allegiance. That's a way of offering recognition and respect. I'd also think that it kind of also cancels out that idea of discovery. When you have a land acknowledgement, you give youth opportunity to know the true story of the people who are already there. And it creates a greater, public awareness. We talk about just having that awareness. And again, just thinking about also, if this was common practice for youth to know and be aware and expect some sort of land acknowledgement, I think it's a way to also think of like how we can decolonize, a lot of our spaces as well. With having that acknowledgement itself, we're recognizing that a lot of lands are still occupied because of, deceptive practices, broken treaties, like Deborah mentioned, the unceded land that, the Kayaking Band of Potawatomi are still, have fought for such a long time. And those are things that students should benefit from. We don't have to hide the truth. That is the history, that's the truth. And the land acknowledgement specifically addresses that truth.
I love what you just said. That really encapsulated it for me, because for many of our youth, I believe this is that first awakening to the truth of our land and our resources, where their school is, where their community is located, where the organization that their parents work on, or the museum that they're visiting, that place of learning. It is oftentimes, I believe, that first conversation about the truth. And I also agree, our children are far more bright and resilient than we give them credit for as well. So we wish for all of that.
was gonna kind of chime in. Yeah, thank you all. That absolutely in agreement with that. And we've actually kind of encountered the same conversation internally with naturalists that were running programs in the forest reserves when the Land Acknowledgement first came out. And they were doing early childhood programming and reading books. And how do we frame it differently, or how do we deliver it? And then that became a vehicle for professional development for our staff. In talking about the Land Acknowledgement, and one of the ways that we've kind of introduced language, regional language, into our programming was teaching young people, in addition to talking about whose ancestral homelands, whose lands this is, teaching greetings in regional dialect. And we really focused on Anishinaabe, on Ojibwe, and teaching staff in the forest reserves that language. And that language piece was really important, and is, kids are sponges, right? They love to learn new words. And so much of culture is embedded in language. So having some part of language revitalization, or being a part of some language revitalization efforts, is a great way to introduce another angle to your land acknowledgement. So we had another question here about what does reciprocity look like outside of a monetary. If you're reaching out to tribal serving organizations, tribal communities, or tribal governments about your land acknowledgement, what examples of reciprocity have your organizations done for that partnership?
So at the Field Museum, this is the project that we're in right now. We're renovating the Native American Hall. We are working collaboratively with over 100 different Native people representing different tribes from all across the nation and in Canada. And, there's the respecting, these voices and these these collaborators as the content experts, and, recognizing, their knowledge as being the authority. And, we're hoping that we do the right thing in honoring and making sure that, their voices are being heard. And that this is a relationship, or these are relationships that we want to continue, and we want to build more relationships. But I think partly because, they have me there as a Native community engagement coordinator, and having Native people involved in the process or in your institution or organization kind of helps make it a little easier to be able to engage with Native communities and Native tribes, because as a lot of non-Native institutions are not trusted by Native people. There's a lot of this kind of trepidation when we're, even personally as a visual artist, being reached out to by non-Native people. I'm always wary of like, okay, well, what's your intent? What are you trying to, I hope this isn't, like you're not trying to exploit me. What are you trying to gain by this? And so, those are all the kinds of questions that we do ask. And you're right, maybe there has to be some sort of strategy. I don't really have an answer to that. I don't, I think, just open the doors. I think if you want to, you have to build that trust first. And sometimes all that is just opening a door, just, going to Native people without any, like purpose in mind, just outside of like, hey, you know what, I just want to start talking to you. I just want to create a relationship. I just want to build a relationship, and then see what grows from that. See what grows from that conversation. It's really just opening the doors, because that I think that's where we get a little untrustworthy, is when people come to us because they only want something, and then, then it's more of a transactional relationship. It's not really a relationship. It's just that, it's a transactional, form of, whatever that is that's happening. So, it's, I think you just, for a lot of institutions too, it's just, you need to put that emotional labor, I think, in trying to figure that out. Because, when you go to like the 1 or 2 Native people that, they're also being asked by, 20 other organizations for the same thing. And that becomes, and I could speak to that personally. I am mentally and emotionally drained in doing this work. I love doing this work. I don't mind it, but it's just know and respect our time, and that we have to take time for self-care as well. I'm sure now, because I'm talking of, a lot of us are bringing up Pokagon Potawatomi. I bet they're being just inundated with a lot of people from Chicagoland reaching out to them. And I'm not sure how they're navigating that. So I would just be careful about, not being very assertive. If you ask or you reach out and you don't get a response right away, that's okay. I'm sure they'll come around. Maybe do your research and trying to find other organizations or groups to reach out to, and just, kind of just keep trying with other organizations and institute, or, like other Native groups and communities. Or, just try as much as you can to do some of the work on your own until you can, collaborate with Native people.
I could just real briefly, again, I don't have a straight answer for that either. Because it's not just about money. It's not just about writing a check and saying, oh, thank you for your time and input. Like Deborah mentioned, it's beyond that and building relationships, but also taking action. First of all, find out, are there Native groups or organizations in your community? As Deborah mentioned, all of our organizations are being inundated with requests and looking for information. And we might not be the best community yet to have all the information centralized, but like the American Indian Center on their website, they have land acknowledgements. There's so many guides online, thankfully, because this work has been, a lot of people put a lot of work into these efforts. So there are a lot of good starting places that you can have to at least, get on the right track. But beyond the land acknowledgement, some things that I just, have people think about is, once you know those Native groups in your community, how can you support them? How can you, if you really want to if it's about money, donate money to those organizations, help support them, because a lot of them are still operating on very little to no, funding. That's one way. But also, when you're building those relationships, you want to learn how to, a lot of folks will give you guidance on how to best implement that practice, and how to engage in further dialogue and collaboration. But, easy things you can do is just look around. Do you have Native folks present at your events, on your team, in your workplace? Do you have Native individuals on your boards? And if not, what does it begin to look like building those relationships and reaching out to, these communities? Again, how do we move just from acknowledgement to actual relationships? If your role at your job involves programming at some type of cultural or educational institution, think, how might you incorporate, how does the program itself represent, a commitment to those Native voices, those stories and perspectives? So I think there's a lot of ways to think beyond just, like Deborah mentioned, it's just a transaction. It's not. If you're really intentional about having a proper land acknowledgement and having the integrity behind it, the relationships and taking action go along with it as well.
Bonjour, as I was listening to both Deborah and Shantae. I was, just jotting down just off the top of my head, the things that we do and open up our 178 acres and our beautiful school to the community as part of that reciprocity and that ongoing relationship with the community. We really try to, I can't say we put them first because it's about educating our students first, but they are a very close second here. So I'm just going to just quickly share with you the kinds of things that we do in terms of reciprocity. We've created safe spaces we have a teaching lodge, and we allow community to use that teaching lodge. We have 2 sweat lodges. We offer a space for namings, weddings, birthdays, sporting events, concerts, our Manuman Wild Rice Camp, our deer camp, powwows, and we share our language and culture as much as we can. We post every day on social media. Once a week, we do words of the week. We are just constantly trying to share and build those relationships with community. I do think our Land and Water Acknowledgement gave us some discipline for doing that. Before, we were doing that because that's just how we are as a school. But in developing that statement, it really underscored and put some formality into it as to how we look at and take care of the land and the water that we're on, and what that means for our community, and inviting them to be caretakers with us. So I just wanted to share that as well. Miigwech.
Thank you all. I think that, going off of what Siobhan said, was that there's a lot of community events. And as you're thinking about creating outreach opportunities, just in my experience with the forest reserves prior to this land acknowledgement ever existing, was just being present in community, right? So setting up a booth about your organization, and not without the intention of making an ask, just to be there and to share the resources with the community that your organization does already, and being present and just being an active member within that community. Yeah, so I was going to also include, I dropped in the chat a call to acknowledge guide. This is from the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. It's got some great resources around land acknowledgements and the process and why it's important. And it's certainly a great tool to share within your organization to start that conversation if it hasn't come up already. The next question I have for the panel was, as we move into these virtual spaces, what about organizations that don't actually have land? Is a land acknowledgement still an important thing for that organization to have if they're not actually managing land?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had to think about this too, because sometimes, like there are certain organizations that represent like an entire state, or, they only, like they do their work in, different parts of the country or different parts of the state or whatever. But I think, like with in those cases, I will advise them to, acknowledge where their home office is. I've seen something horrible too, where somebody like tried to create this electronic land acknowledgement, but then like in the end didn't even acknowledge like any Indigenous people. And so, I recommend to people just, acknowledge where you're at. It's good to, as Shantae said earlier too, it's good practice, for all of us too, as individuals. But, yeah, I think, in some cases, I think what the hope and wish from some Native people is that there be this opportunity for land back, right? So if you are an organization that has land, how is like, how can that be worked out? I know that there are also, aside from land back, I had another interesting conversation with another Potawatomi person who said that, there's some tribes that may not even have the capacity right now at this time to, if they were to be given land back, to even take care of it, because they're worried about other things for their people that they need to take care of, and so they may not have the capacity. But she said something really interesting, that what she really wants is her language back. She wants her culture back. There are all these other things that make us who we are that we want back as well. And so how can your organization help in those efforts? And providing, like, what kinds of resources does your organization have that you can share? How can your organization use its privilege? There are so many other things that you can use and leverage and give back in those ways to Native people. So what kind of privilege does your organization have that you can use to leverage something for, a Native community? And again, it's talking and having that relationship with that community to find out what it is that they want, and how how it is that you can help them if they want your help. They may just not want your help. They just may want your support and just, your awareness, and to spread that awareness. So really it's just, and it is a case by case. It really is just talking to different, the communities around you, the Native communities around you.
I was trying not to give let Siobhan go before me. As far as for organizations who don't have land, again, I think it's still common practice to, again, open up any event with respect and reverence. So if you don't own your building and you're not occupying, someone owns it, right? Like Deborah mentioned, whether you take it back to the home office, but I think we want to just, I think at the end of the day, you just want to know that the purpose of the land acknowledgement is for recognition and is for respect. It doesn't have to be this big, elaborate, history research paper of what happened, time immemorial on those lands. Some folks were asking, like, well, how do we find the communities? It's Google. It's easy. If you type in Chicagoland Native American organizations, you'll find them. And I don't, and I'm not trying to make light of that, but it's not this big research project. Like I said, even though I work in the school district, I'm not an educator. I'm not a historian. I'm not a researcher. I'm just a parent, a mother, and an advocate for teaching, and just bringing that cultural awareness. You don't need to be experts. And so if you don't have that land, it's just a simple acknowledgement. You could just make it as simple as before we start this event, we want to acknowledge the Indigenous inhabitants of this land that we carry out our event on, or our space. A lot of virtual events, the institutions, again, where their main location is located, they just recognize that. It doesn't have to be a 10-minute introduction about all the tribes who were there or who may not have been there, because that information does change. So I just want people to take a step back, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's simple. It's an acknowledgement of recognition and respect, and then you can carry out your festivities or the rest of your program and event. We just hope to provide insight about continuing to build those relationships. Again, we don't want it to just be a check the box thing, like, oh, we made an acknowledgement, and you still made no efforts to have better relationships with that Native community. So just wanted to say that real quickly.
Well, I love that. And to that, I would just add, we are all children of Mother Earth. Everything we have, she feeds us, she clothes us, she provides us shelter, sustenance, all of the animals, all of creation, her beautiful water, the air we breathe. So, in thinking about the Native organizations that I work with every day that don't own land, right? They have a suite of offices, perhaps in a building somewhere. And that really gave me pause to think about that. But to what Shantae was saying is even just that mindset to stop and think about Mother Earth, creation and water. It isn't just about, and I don't mean to minimalize that at all, just about the original inhabitants or caretakers, past, present, and future. It is also that respect for Mother Earth, for her water, and for all of creation, down to the insects. And I don't want to get off on a tangent, but you walk in any of those big box stores and you have aisles and aisles of things that now even bugs can't live in the dirt. We've got all kinds of chemicals that we're trying to eradicate them. It's like they don't have a right to live even in their own environment. And that is really indicative of how Indigenous people have been treated all along. We've been wiped out, pushed, forced, erased, removed, assimilated, all of those things. And so just that basic, I want to respect and acknowledge the beautiful earth that I live on, this water that is nearby, if not right here in my immediate area and vicinity, and start to at least acknowledge and think about who were the people that were here taking care of that land, who are the people who are here now among us and those future generations. So I just want to add that to that beautiful statement that Shantae just shared with us. Which
Thank you. In looking at the comments and as this flowed and talking about the land acknowledgement is acknowledging both peoples and the non-human relatives that call this land home as well. We were talking about this the community and reaching out, and a lot of the organizations here are centralized around the cities, and I'd imagine, looking at that as an organization looking for to write a land acknowledgement seems like it's a little daunting if you're out in the suburbs and everything seems to be happening in the city. But at least speaking to the Native community in the Chicagoland area, is it's a decentralized community, and Siobhan, you can speak to that in Wisconsin. I don't know as much, but the community is spread out. So although you may see a concentration of Native serving organization around urban centers, that doesn't mean that there's not Native families that live in the surrounding suburbs, and creating spaces that are safe within your organization for events or whatever the case may be is an important step. Siobhan, does the community look similar to that in Wisconsin in your experience?
it does here in Milwaukee. And it's interesting because when we need to hire language and culture teachers, it's difficult. We have 11 tribes here. We're really fortunate to have trust land for that many tribes in our state. But they're afraid of that big city in many instances. We are constantly trying to build those relationships, create those, it's above and beyond an employment pipeline. It's a language revitalization, cultural reclaiming, and a great healing among all of us in trying to bring everyone together. And it is all about building those relationships. It's everything that we heard today, which is key to building a land and acknowledgement statement. And I think in developing one, you want one that will stand up. And yes, it is an evolving thing and it can change, but that the tribal nations who you're looking to partner with or organizations would look at that and say, okay, they get it. They heard me, they worked with me, they listened to me, they understand me. We have this place in common, and it is about that respect. Absolutely. We heard that several times from Shantae and Deborah as well. So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, it's a constant outreach for us. And it's a little more daunting because they're afraid to come to the big city, but we're constantly outreaching. We take busloads of our children to Menominee Tribe every year. We do Sugar Bush, and then we take busloads of children way up north where I'm from into Ojibwe country for round dances in the winter, or Menominee Camp in the beginning of the school year. And so that's, again, that reciprocity as well. We don't want to be always extracting from our tribal communities their cultural resources. We also want to be in a position to give back and help strengthen them as well, and then give them some opportunities. I hope that helped answer your question, Anna.
Yes, thank you. It did. Thank you very much. Siobhan. I had one more question. I had a question for Shantae. In that direction, on that thread of the conversation of community, I know that the American Indian Education Program has a land acknowledgement, but CPS at large does not. Have you had any schools that have kind of adopted the land acknowledgement in partnership with your programming?
No, great question, Adam. I think we're very unique in that because we're asking a three-person small team to infiltrate a whole, Chicago school district. So we're not aware of any schools that have. Maybe teachers in the classroom, they have done so. We've seen quite a few teachers use some sort of acknowledgement in their email signatures. But a lot of that reason is, again, Chicago Public Schools is the third largest urban school district in the entire country. And it's not easy to find, okay, who's the person who can help us get this done? Thankfully, we've in the past have developed relationships with past administrators. Our former CPS CEO, Dr. Janice Jackson, was a great supporter of our program. She came to our events. She acknowledged our Native students very often, her being an African-American woman. And we were we were building that relationship with her. And then she left, and she was a wonderful CEO. And then now we have a new CEO, and we're literally having to restart that process of building that relationship, getting to know his team. And so it's a constant, political bureaucracy that we have to even internally go through. It's always a challenge just to get to in front of the right people, just to even have the conversation. And, we're not a political team. We're not, we're not a social justice activist. We're just trying to advocate for our students. So it's not an excuse, but it's just the reality of that. We can't even send out a mass email to all the principals and say, hey, it's Native American Heritage Month right now. Here's some resources. Contact us if you want help. We don't even have that reach within the Chicago Public School District to do that. So it's really hard. We just, internally, we try to get to know all the new people who come in because it's a constant rotation. There's a new chief equity officer. There's a new CEO. There's new people coming in and out of the district who are doing great work. It's just hard for us to maintain those relationships to even get to the table and say, hey, now can we talk about a land acknowledgement? So, we hope. We're glad that we do. I mean, we work with a lot of principals who are aware of our program. They support us. And it's a lot of, even right now, we have some very offensive artwork in a lot of our school buildings. And we have full blown on departments fighting it. And it's a whole bureaucracy of approvals and, all hearings and all type of stuff. So it's not easy to just infiltrate that system and just say, okay, great, we got our land acknowledgement. We barely just got appropriate boxes to acknowledge the American Indian population so that people could check off the right box to acknowledge their racial background. So it's really hard and really tough. But, we're standing here. We'll continue to do the work and build the relationships. And, I pray to God, before I leave working this program, I hope to say that I was part of a team who helped get an official land acknowledgement enforced through Chicago Public Schools.
Thank you, Shantae. That was great. Thank you. So I had one last question. I know we're coming up to the 2:00 mark, and I absolutely appreciate your time, everyone, on the panel, all of our audience members. This last question I had for Deborah, and I thought of it as you were talking and talking about the Field Museum's land acknowledgement, and then redoing the Native American Hall and the sacred items that were within that hall And I would imagine some repatriation that happened around those sacred items. Was the land acknowledgement, did that offer some sort of connection for communities that items were returned to, or if they were or were not? I don't know. I was wondering about that. I hope you could answer that for me.
Well, it's complicated. So NAGPRA is, and that's the Native American Graves and Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, is 31 years old this year. And, you know, the repatriation and NAGPRA has been a part of the Field Museum since NAGPRA was put into law. It's just, you know, it is a very complicated thing. I know the Field Museum is criticized often by Native communities and Native people on their repatriation efforts because of the very short staff. It's very slow. It's a slow process. It's a long process. It's a complicated process, but in no way at the moment is there any kind of, you know, correlation with repatriation and the land acknowledgement. Repatriation has always happened, but, you know, with the renovation and the deinstallation of the old exhibit, there definitely have been more claims that have come through by different tribes. But again, you know, it's such a complicated process, and yeah, it's not related to the land acknowledgement at all. And I don't feel like, I think the land acknowledgement was more of a product of the work that we're doing in renovating the hall and doing, you know, the community engagement work that I do, connecting communities and Native people to collections. So that's part of the work that I do, is I make sure that Native people come and they have access to collections. I try to provide as much access as possible to Native community locally, to use the museum as like a meeting space, to come in for free, to, you know, host events for Native community. And so I don't feel that, you know, it's not because of the land acknowledgement. The land acknowledgement came out of all of that we're already doing, or that I've been helping to also do.
Thank you, Deborah. Well, I'm looking at the chat and it looks as though there's no more questions for the day. I covered all the questions that I had for our panel. So thank you all. I think if you're muted at home, you can give everyone a round of applause. Thank you, Siobhan, Shante, and Deborah for being on the panel today. We really, really appreciate your words. And I really am thankful to be a part of this with you all today. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone that tuned in for spending your afternoon with us on this Friday. It's beautiful outside here in Chicago, a beautiful fall, cold fall. So it'll remind you of that seasonal change that's upon us right now. So thank you all for spending a few 2 hours inside with us on this beautiful day. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And thank you all again.
Miigwech. Giga Wabaman.
Yeah, bye.